Last time in the Boruto anime, Lord Tento was kidnapped and held ransom by the leader of the Mujina gang, Shojoji. But not long after, our hero Boruto Uzumaki flies in to save the day. Today, the final showdown commences. Yo, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to a brand new video, and today we're talking about episode 151 of the Boruto anime. This episode was the final episode of the long-awaited Mujina bandits arc, which for those of you who don't know is the first major arc from the manga following on from the events of the Momoshiki attack. And there's some really great bits to pick out from this episode. From voice acting to animation to just overall tension and vibe. This episode felt like what I think a lot of people would call the proper Naruto feeling. That being said though, we did get a brand new opening this episode, and my goodness. I'm not going to talk about it at all in this video, because if you haven't seen my live reaction to the opening that went up earlier, then go and have a look. I mean, I reacted like an absolute madman. But I digress. Let's jump into this episode. Usually when it comes to big final fights in the Boruto anime, there's not a lot to talk to aside from the normal common things like, animation, voice acting, music and things, because although you can still definitely talk about stuff like that from this episode, usually when they're the anime only fights, it's just a nice fight. There's not a lot of plot progression pushing behind the fight, quite like there was with this episode, because it is from the manga, meaning there was so much plot driving it that the fight itself sort of took the back seat in my opinion, which is what I will mostly talk about in this video. That being said though, I will say that I did think the animation in this fight the art and animation was both really on point. It added some new scenes to the fight which were not originally in the manga, like the wind style jutsu from Boruto, all little things like that just sprinkled in here and there, which really added to the overall fluidity of the fight and made it much more rewarding to watch visually from the reader's standpoint as compared to what it was like just flicking through the pages originally when you read it in the manga. There was also a few scenes in particular which really captured Boruto's emotions. For example, learning about the true fate of Kokiri and what really happened at Hozuki Castle. You can see that the staff behind this episode put a lot of emphasis on the shock and distraught nature upon Boruto's face. Talking of Hozuki Castle though, I feel like that's a decent place to start. After seeing how everything's played out in this arc now, we can look back on the Hozuki Castle portion of the story, and it's got its place. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely got its place, but I think overall, it didn't have quite the impact I was expecting. That being said, you could definitely see the emotional impact it had on Boruto's character in this episode, which did definitely add a much more of a slight emotional touch to this fight. The prison portion wasn't bad by any means, and I can at least respect the team behind it for putting some effort into trying to make it something bigger than it already was in the manga. On to the rest of the episode though, and boy, where do I even start? I think the friendship between Boruto and Tento was absolutely solidified in this episode if it wasn't already. There's nothing I could wish for more than at this minute other than seeing Tento return at some point later on in the story as a brand new ninja and going on a mission or whatever with Boruto. Another thing from this episode which I found really interesting was Shojoji's other ability. Aside from the corpse clone jutsu, we also saw the wind style Zephyr shield. Now, this jutsu is definitely something done on purpose by Kadachi, because if you look at some of the other villains that we've got in the story of Boruto, whether it be Momoshiki, Urashiki, the scientific ninja tool as well to some degree, plus many other villains that are shown later on in the manga, and you start to see a common similarity between each of their fighting styles. And Shojoji had a similar one in this episode. If you look at Momoshiki, for example, and how he would absorb and fire back attack, Shojoji just sort of skips over the absorbing phase and goes straight into the repelling phase of the attack. It's a cool touch. It's nice to see some common ground between all the major villains we've had so far. However, alarm bells did start ringing. I was sat there and I was thinking, this is really cool. This is, it fits into Momoshiki, Urashiki, other characters that we've seen later on in the story. But I was also sat there and thinking, as cool as it is right now, will there ever be a point in the story where we're fighting characters and they just absorb a Rasengan and fire back a Rasengan, absorb a Chidori, fire back a Chidori, whatever it is? Is there going to be a point where we just think, I've seen this, it's a little bit boring? That's the one thing I don't want. As cool as it is right now, I do worry about the fact that maybe at some point comes a point where it's a little bit repetitive. On the topic of absorbing attacks though in this episode, let's talk about Karma. Now I remember everyone talking about this back when we were all theorizing on the Karma seal originally, but did you guys pick up on the Rasengan vanishing as the seal expanded in this episode? Yes, if you hadn't caught on, Boruto actually subconsciously absorbed his own Rasengan. This is massive foreshadowing for later events that I'm obviously not going to talk about in this video for any of you people only watching the anime, but I did want to bring it up because I remember it was something people were talking about loads and loads and loads back during the day and the early run of the manga. So I wanted to relight that theorizing and mysterious sensation that we had back in the day for all of you anime onlys to sit there and get your minds around. While on the topic of mystery though, I want to shed a light on what could potentially be my favourite scene from the entire episode, and that was when Shojoji sees the seal for the first time. Like I said, arguably my favourite scene from this entire episode. The soundtrack for a start is one of the best soundtracks this series has ever produced, and if I'm not mistaken, it's the same soundtrack that's only ever been used before with the Jogan reveal versus Urashiki.
Jogan ですか。厄介な目を持っている。その目は。あれは知ってるのか。その様子。どうやら奴らとは無関係のようだな。ビビらせやがる。
So straight away, alarm bells are ringing, and you sit there as the viewer and think,
oh boy, this is the real thing.
Secondly, the rapid shift in tone for Shojoji's character is staggeringly apparent. He goes from being quite an overly confident, loud, psycho screwball to being a extremely cautious, quiet, and quite frankly scared individual. This not only adds a bit more to Shojoji's character, which, let's be honest, is always welcome, but more importantly puts just the emphasis on the sheer terror that comes with the seal and the Kara organisation. But while we're talking about Kara, a lot of people in the community right now are slightly disappointed on a certain scene that we didn't get, which I actually have quite a strong opinion on. Now, if you go off the manga, following on from the scene when Kara is first revealed to us with Shojoji's interrogation, we actually see a meeting amongst all the Kara members. Now, I stand by the fact that not animating that scene is the right way to go at this moment. And I know a lot of people will heavily disagree with me on that, because a lot of people, myself included, we all want to see and hear Kara in the anime. If you saw my opening reaction, you know how much I'm dying to see them. That being said, just going off the schedule of the anime, it just doesn't make any sense to put the meeting right here, right now. Likelihood is that we'll be going back to anime original content for at least a week going off the preview. Therefore, by animating a scene, which I'll be as spoiler free as I can, by the way, but animating a scene where the focus is so centrally placed upon urgency and swift, speedy execution doesn't make sense when we could potentially be getting anime original content again for the next week, 2 weeks, however many weeks. What's the point in animating a scene like that when for the next 1 week, 2 weeks, however many weeks it is, months maybe, what's the point in animating it when by the time we do eventually come back around to seeing the outcome of that urgent reaction which is needed, it's all rendered pointless because the sense of urgency is no longer there when it's been months. It just completely messes up the story at that point because it's such a vital part. There was never any confirmation on when exactly that scene took place. There was no reason to rush straight into it. That scene, for all we care, could take place months and months in advance, which adds in more room for some anime-only content. I think the best thing to do is what they did do, and that is to leave it, because I think not only does it not make sense, but also when we do eventually get it, it is such a perfect way of introducing the next major arc from the manga. There's one last thing though I do want to comment on before we do wrap up this video, and that is the punishment for Team 7. Does anybody think we're actually going to get any form of punishment for Team 7? For example, the next episode doesn't seem to be focusing around that. Is it going to be one of those things which by the very next episode is just going to be swept aside or forgotten? Or is it something that maybe they will build a small anime original arc around? I'm not too sure. Punishment is interesting. It sort of follows on from the canon manga part of the story, so it does make sense to maybe focus a little bit on that. But punishment doesn't sound overly exciting. I don't know what they could do with it. Let me know in the comment section down below what route they will take with that part of the story, if any. That being said, I think we're going to end the discussion for episode 151 of Boruto right here. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're not already as well to become a member of the Senpai Squad. And I'll be seeing you guys in another video very, very soon. But until then, as always, peace.